So I was like woefully underprepared for a technical interview. Hey everyone. I thought I would continue the series of me talking about my summer and working in Microsoft and working tech in general, and talk about how I got my internship at Microsoft. So I will go over, I guess, a timeline of when I applied, my background, so my prior experience, and what I think maybe contributed or what made me a good applicant, some interview tips that I had, and what the actual process of interviewing was like. So some questions that were asked, and yeah, what interviewing was actually like. As a background, I applied to a bunch of different internships my sophomore year of college, and I ended up applying to Microsoft as one of them, but I didn't really hear back for a long time until it was like almost like March or April, and by that time I already committed to a different offer. But I got an email from them saying, hey, our internship class is full, you applied a little bit late, but we still think we would still like to interview you, and maybe you could work for us in the following summer. And a recruiter reached out saying that they were coming to my school's campus and doing on-campus interviews, and if I was still interested, I could sign up for a slot for an internship potentially the summer after. So the summer after my junior year, which is this current summer. And so yeah, I ended up interviewing in the spring, and then I guess they liked me, and so they invited me back for a second round interview, which was a final on-site interview in September. And then I received an offer in the end of September, and then I committed in November, and then the rest of the school year happened, and I am working here the summer after junior year. So some prior experience, or what I think made me a good applicant for the position, was that I was previously an intern at Facebook, so I had some experience in the technical world. I applied specifically to be a program manager, so a PM intern at Microsoft, but I think it did help that I had worked at a previous tech company and I had that kind of like name backing it. But I don't think it's like super critical. I know plenty of people who had their first internships as a junior and didn't really work at tech companies or didn't really do anything after during their summers that was related to like program management or software engineering or tech. They just did normal things in their summer. So don't worry that you need to have these. I think this is just, I'll just speak from my experience, and I think it might have contributed to helping, but I don't know. So I was an intern at Facebook under the Facebook University program. I can talk more about that if people are interested. And I had also worked at a startup before, and I had also worked a summer program for entrepreneurship. So I had a little bit of working experience in my background, and I think one of the things that I spoke to the most was that I was a director for my school's hackathon. So I had a lot of experience managing a team, doing something in the technical space, but also like experience organizing things and could speak to what it's like being on a team, and also working with others, which I think really, really helps if you're interested in program management specifically. The interview structure itself, so there's 2 interviews, at least for my experience, there were 2 interviews. There's a first round interview, which is on campus, and in this interview I had a choice between doing a PM interview or a dev interview. So when I got to the interview, it was a 30-minute time slot. I showed up at the Career Center a little bit nervous, and it was like at the end of my sophomore year, so I didn't really know that much about programming yet. I had only really started studying computer science like my freshman year, so I only had a year of experience, so I wasn't really super experienced. I was very nervous about doing a technical interview, and they asked me like, would you like to do a technical interview for a dev position, or would you like to do a different kind of interview for a PM interview? And I was very nervous, but I decided to go for a PM interview because being a PM sounded interesting to me, and also I was like woefully underprepared for a technical interview, in my honest opinion. And so I ended up doing a program manager interview, and they asked me a question: how would you create a specific product to help the elderly? And I would have to brainstorm with the interviewer and just kind of think on my feet about like what are some possible solutions of like how I could like help the elderly. Maybe they're dealing with a lot of like loneliness, so what are some things that I could maybe, what are some product ideas I can help for tackling this specific customer segment? And I had to come up with some ideas of like what are the needs of this particular customer segment, and brainstorm a list of those. It was kind of like a problem solving discussion. It wasn't like the interview was still like quiet sitting there like expecting you to like come up with this whole new product idea on the fly. It was more like a collaborative process. So I would say like, so this is my assumptions about the customer segment, like this is what I think they should want, does this sound reasonable? And the interviewer would be like, yes, that sounds really reasonable, or no, maybe like what about this, or let me just clarify the problem a little bit more and elaborate that I want you to focus more on this direction. So it's a little bit of a back and forth process, and the interviewer will guide you through it, but in general it's a little bit more of a problem solving, if I were to work on a product, like what would I do kind of scenario. Whereas a dev intern interview is more of a specific technical problem, so it's more like see if you can reverse this array, or see if you can sort these strings into a certain order. The second interview, which is on site, I don't know if this will happen in the near future because of the pandemic, but when I interviewed, it was an on-site interview, so they flew me out to Seattle in their Redmond campus, and there was a series of 4 different interviews. So I came like around lunchtime, and we got a free lunch at the company and got to walk around and see the campus. And then in the afternoon, there was like 4 back-to-back interviews, about like 15 minutes each, and then there was like a 10-minute break in between. So it was very much like back to back to back, but it was only 4 of them and only like half a day. So I would not stress too much about it. I think they all focus on different things. So for example, one interviewer asked me about my past experiences. So I spoke a lot about being a hackathon organizer and how I think that helps me with working on a team and thinking through like a lot of different pieces along the timeline. I had an interview that was more about like my past experience and what I learned, and then I also had another one that was more technical focused. So I had a technical interview per se where they asked me to like write code in Java or whatever language I was comfortable in, and essentially just like reverse or identify like numbers in an array. But it was definitely very much in line with questions you would see on LeetCode, which is a website that I use to practice for technical interviews. There were some interviews that were focused more on problem solving. So for instance, think of like 10 additional uses for an expo marker, or there would be like some like kind of consulting like questions where they would ask you like, how would you predict how many balls could fit into a swimming pool? So more problem solving questions like that where you had to think on your feet. So I would say the interviews were a good mix between problem solving questions and asking about your past experience and technical questions. Expect a whole range of interviews if you're going for a final round interview as a PM. And lastly, I want to go over some interview tips. I'll put some links in the description box of videos that I watched that really helped me. In terms of preparation, I honestly did not really prepare that much, and I think that honestly helped me. I remember skimming through the Cracking the PM interview book and also skimming through a few articles, but to be honest, I didn't really read them like cover to cover or really that in depth. I mostly just spoke of my own personal experience and what I've learned, and I think it really helped that I had some experience related to entrepreneurship or startups, and I had some familiarity with understanding like what growth is and how to measure success. So how do you really measure the success of a product? And I had some experience thinking about questions like that. So I honestly think that the more original you can become and the more you could speak on what your perspective is of what makes a product successful, the better of an advocate you will be. I also, in my interview, was really sure to talk about specific objectives and key results, or in the industry it's called OKRs. So an objective is like a large goal. So I want this product to be the biggest, I want this product to be the most used product in the market in 5 years from now. That's my bigger objective. And then I would narrow that down into like key results. So I would talk through, like, in a problem solving type question, I would talk through some key results. So in order to achieve this big objective, I'd break it down to smaller goals, like by this month I want this many users, or by this month I want to increase the user feedback overall sentiment by 3% or something. Just throw out a random number out there and show that you've thought about this problem and how to break it down to smaller achievable steps. Another thing that I talked about was to break it down to KPIs, which stands for key performance indicators. So when you are tracking the performance of something, like, what are the things that you want to track? Is it number of clicks on a website? Is it engaged feedback? So number of percent of people that leave comments? Is it distance scrolled? You want to think about, like, what are the key things that you want to track when you are measuring the success of something. But another tip I would give is to say what you're thinking and talk through every single step. So I would say the best interviews are the ones where I feel like I can have a conversation with the interviewer, where it's not just like me throwing ideas out there and it landing awkwardly and us having nothing to say. I think the best ones are the ones that I can collaborate with the interviewer and really talk through everything that I'm thinking of, even if it's wrong. So even if I've, like, made a misstep, I'm thinking through, like, so this is what I'm going to do next because I think this way and these are my assumptions. So you really want to question all your assumptions at every single step and really vocalize what you're thinking instead of just, like, putting your head down and being like, I guess this is it. You want to say what you're thinking even if you are pretty sure you're wrong or you don't really know what you're saying. You just want to give the interviewer insight into, like, how you're thinking about a problem, which I think is ultimately why they hire someone, is the way they think, not what information they actually know. And another tip I would give is to do your research beforehand. It really helps to know what product area or team you want to be on, and say it and explicitly mention it in your interview. I would say that in my interview process, I really emphasize that I want to be on a computer graphics team, and I taken a lot of courses in it, and I was interested in learning more about it. And lo and behold, when I got placed onto my team, I was placed on the graphics team. And I know a few other people who also mentioned that they were interested in one specific area and they ended up being placed on that team. So I don't think unless you make your interest clear that they will just put you in a random team. I know plenty of other people who didn't really, like, make what they wanted clear, or they didn't really have a preference, and then they got placed into a random team a few weeks before they started. And that can be a good thing if you just want to, like, take a survey of the industry and see what you end up on. But if you have something that you are interested in and want to learn more about, I think it really helps to do your research beforehand, ask other people who interned there, talk to the interviewers about what teams that they are on, that they liked, and make it very clear that you want to be on that team or you're interested in learning more about it. So yeah, these are my general tips and tricks for interviewing and a little story of how I got my internship at Microsoft. If people have any questions, just let me know and then I will try to answer them. Otherwise, I hope you found this information helpful.